The dusty window of the stagecoach offered Dorothy Evans little comfort as she pressed her handkerchief against her trembling lips, the sting of rejection still fresh after being sent away by the Wilsons. "Too plain, Mrs." Wilson had declared with cold finality, examining Dorothy like a flawed piece of merchandise rather than the mail-order bride her son had paid good money to bring to Wyoming territory in 1876. Dorothy had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston with hope in her heart, and her mother's cameo brooch pinned to her sensible gray traveling dress. Now that hope lay shattered as the stagecoach rumbled toward the next town, Copper Creek, where she would need to find work until she could save enough for a ticket back east. At 22, she had left behind the whispers of spinsterhood only to face humiliation in this wild frontier. "Next stop, Copper Creek," the driver called out, his voice carrying over the thundering hooves and creaking wood. Dorothy straightened her back and tucked a wayward strand of mousy brown hair beneath her bonnet. Plain she might be, with her unremarkable features and slender frame, but her father hadn't raised her to wallow in self-pity. She would make her own way now. The stagecoach rolled to a stop before a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. Men in worn hats and muddy boots wandered between the general store, the bank, and what appeared to be a rather boisterous saloon. Dorothy clutched her carpetbag tighter, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. "Miss, you getting down here?" The stagecoach driver peered at her expectantly. "Yes, thank you," she replied, accepting his calloused hand as she stepped down onto the dirt road. Her boots, practical yet already showing signs of wear from her journey, raised small puffs of dust as she steadied herself. "Hotel's that way," the driver pointed toward a 2-story building with peeling white paint. "The Copper Creek Inn, Mrs. Holloway runs it. Decent woman." Dorothy nodded her thanks and set off, her shoulders squared despite the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The afternoon sun beat mercilessly on her bonnet as she made her way down the street, aware of curious glances from the townsfolk. The hotel lobby was refreshingly cool after the heat outside. A stern-faced woman looked up from behind a small desk. "Good afternoon," Dorothy said. "I would like a room, please, the most affordable you have." Mrs. Holloway. Dorothy assumed this as she eyed her carefully. "Traveling alone?" "Yes, madam. Unusual for a young woman. What brings you to Copper Creek?" Dorothy hesitated, not wishing to share her humiliation. "I'm seeking employment. I can sew, cook, and I'm well educated. I taught at a school in Boston for 2 years. The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Well, as it happens, the town's been looking for a teacher. The last one left when she married a miner from Silver Ridge." She pushed a ledger toward Dorothy. "Rooms 50 cents a night, sign here." As Dorothy signed the register, the front door swung open with a bang, causing her to jump. A tall man with broad shoulders and a dust-covered hat strode in, spurs jingling with each step. His face was partially hidden by several days' worth of beard, but his eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, caught Dorothy's attention immediately. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, voice deep and rough like gravel, "got those supplies you ordered. My men are unloading them out back." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," Mrs. Holloway replied. "This is Miss Evans. She's just arrived on the afternoon stage." The man, Mr. Quinn, turned toward Dorothy, and she felt herself flush under his direct gaze. He tipped his hat slightly, those blue eyes taking in her travel-worn appearance without judgment. "Quentin Quinn, madam, own the Double Q Ranch outside town." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Welcome to Copper Creek. Dorothy Evans," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you." He nodded once more, then turned back to Mrs. Holloway. "Tell your husband I'll be by tomorrow about that broken fence." With that, he strode out, leaving behind the scent of leather, horses, and something distinctly masculine. Mrs. Holloway handed Dorothy a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs. Supper's at 6. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the main street. Dorothy set down her carpetbag and sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to fall. She had failed before she'd even begun. The Wilsons had taken one look at her plain face, her sensible clothing, her lack of coquettish charm, and decided she wasn't good enough to be a wife. By the time the dinner bell rang, Dorothy had washed her face, changed into her one other dress, a dark blue cotton that had seen better days, and resolved to inquire about the teaching position first thing in the morning. She would not allow the Wilsons' rejection to define her. The dining room held 3 other guests, an elderly couple who smiled politely and a traveling salesman who barely looked up from his plate. Dorothy ate quietly, savoring the simple but hearty stew. "Miss Evans," Mrs. Holloway approached as Dorothy finished her meal. "I've been thinking. The town council meets tomorrow afternoon to discuss the teaching position. My husband's on the council and I could mention your interest." "That would be most kind," Dorothy said gratefully. "I have references from Boston, though they're in my trunk, which should arrive on tomorrow's stage." Good, and Mrs. Holloway hesitated. "Forgive me for asking, but you seem like a respectable woman. Were you perhaps coming to meet someone? A mail-order situation, perhaps?" Heat crept up Dorothy's neck. Yes, but it didn't work out." The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. "The Wilsons over in Riverton?" Dorothy's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Young Thomas Wilson's been advertising for a bride for months. His mother's turned away 3 already." She patted Dorothy's hand. "Don't take it personally, dear. Agatha Wilson thinks no woman's good enough for her precious son." Somehow, knowing she wasn't the first to be rejected made the sting slightly less painful. "Thank you for telling me. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." Dorothy slept fitfully, dreams of rejection and uncertainty plaguing her. She rose with the sun, dressed in her gray dress again, and headed downstairs. The hotel dining room was empty save for one person, Quentin Quinn, sipping coffee at a corner table. He stood when she entered, manners evidently not forgotten despite his rugged appearance. "Miss Evans, join me." Dorothy hesitated, then nodded, taking the seat across from him. A young girl appeared with coffee, which Dorothy accepted gratefully. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you're looking for work," he said after she'd taken a few sips. "Teaching," she said. "Yes, I understand there's a position available." He nodded. "There is, though I should warn you, it's not like teaching in Boston. The schoolhouse is just one room. Children from 6 to 16, most of them farm kids who'd rather be helping their parents than learning their letters." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Quinn," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "I can see that." He paused. "Mrs. Holloway also mentioned you came as a mail-order bride." Dorothy nearly choked on her coffee. "She had no right, don't blame her," he cut in gently. "Small town. No secrets here, and she only told me because." He cleared his throat. "Because I was asking about you." "Asking about me?" Dorothy repeated, confused. "You caught my attention," he said simply. "Something about you seemed different." Dorothy let out a bitter laugh. "Different is one way to put it. Plain is what Mrs. Wilson called me before sending me away." Quentin's expression darkened. "Agatha Wilson is a bitter old woman who's driven away half the eligible women in the territory. Her opinion isn't worth the dirt under my boots." His vehemence surprised her. "You sound like you speak from experience." He took another sip of coffee. "She tried to match her son with my sister once, called Rebecca too rough around the edges. My sister runs the finest horse breeding program in 3 territories and could buy and sell the Wilsons 10 times over." He shook his head. "Some people can't see true value when it's standing right in front of them." The way he looked at her when he said this made something flutter in Dorothy's chest, but she quickly tamped it down. She wasn't about to be made a fool of twice. "The council meeting is at 2 o'clock at the town hall," he said, rising. "I'll be there. I'm on the council too." "Oh," Dorothy said, suddenly nervous. "I see." "Don't worry," he said with a small smile. "Unlike Agatha Wilson, we actually need someone with skills and determination." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Evans." Dorothy spent the morning retrieving her trunk from the stage office and preparing her references. At precisely 1:45, she made her way to the town hall, a modest building that appeared to serve multiple functions for the community. Inside, 5 men sat at a long table, Quentin Quinn among them. A small audience of townsfolk had gathered, curious about their potential new teacher. Dorothy felt their eyes on her as she walked to the front of the room, clutching her references in slightly trembling hands. Mayor Jennings, a portly man with an impressive mustache, called the meeting to order. "We're here to interview Miss Dorothy Evans for the position of schoolteacher. Miss Evans, please tell us about your qualifications." Dorothy took a deep breath and spoke clearly, describing her education at a women's college in Massachusetts and her 2 years teaching at a girls' school in Boston. She explained her teaching philosophy and her belief that education should be practical as well as academic. "These are my references," she said, passing them to the mayor. "As you'll see, I'm particularly commended for my ability to manage students of different ages and abilities in one classroom." The men passed the letters between them, nodding approvingly. One elderly gentleman with spectacles perched on his nose asked, "What made you leave Boston for the frontier, Miss Evans?" Dorothy hesitated, aware of Quentin's steady gaze. "I was seeking a change," she said finally, "an opportunity to be of service where teachers are needed most." The questioning continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from her ability to discipline unruly students to whether she could teach practical subjects like agriculture and animal husbandry, alongside reading and mathematics. "I believe in adapting education to the community's needs," she answered firmly. "While I might need guidance on some of the more practical aspects of frontier life, I'm a quick learner." Finally, Mayor Jennings asked the men to vote. Each raised his hand in turn, including Quentyn, whose eyes had never left her face. "Well, Miss Evans," the mayor said with a smile, "it appears you're hired. The position pays $30 a month plus room and board at the schoolhouse. There's a small apartment in the back. School begins in 2 weeks, which should give you time to prepare." Relief washed over Dorothy. "Thank you, gentlemen. I won't disappoint you." As the meeting dispersed, Quentyn approached her. "Congratulations, Miss Evans. Thank you, Mr. Quinn, and thank you for your vote of confidence." "It was well earned," he hesitated. "If you'd like to see the schoolhouse, I'd be happy to take you there now. It needs some work, I'm afraid." Dorothy nodded, gathering her papers. "I would appreciate that." They walked together down the main street, past curious onlookers who watched the new schoolteacher and the rancher with undisguised interest. "Ignore them," Quentyn murmured. "Like I said, small town." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a weathered building with a small bell tower. Inside, a single room contained rows of battered desks and a larger desk at the front. Shelves lined one wall, half filled with outdated textbooks. A blackboard hung on another wall, cracked in one corner. "The living quarters are through here," Quentyn said, leading her to a door at the back. The apartment consisted of a small sitting room with a pot-bellied stove, a tiny bedroom, and an even smaller kitchen. It was dusty and neglected, but Dorothy could see its potential. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. After the uncertainty of the past days, having a place of her own, a purpose, felt like a miracle. Quentyn looked skeptical. "It needs cleaning, repairs. That roof probably leaks." "Then I'll clean it and fix what I can, and I'll put out buckets when it rains," she replied with determination. He studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd take one look at this place and run back east on the next stage." Dorothy shook her head. "I'm not running anywhere, Mr. Quinn. This is my chance to start fresh, and I intend to make the most of it." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "I believe you will." He cleared his throat. "I should let you get back to the hotel. You've got 2 weeks to prepare for a classroom full of prairie children." "Yes, thank you for showing me around." As they walked back toward town, Quentyn said casually, "My ranch is hosting a barn raising this Saturday. The whole town will be there. It would be a good chance for you to meet your future students and their parents." "That sounds wonderful," Dorothy replied. "I'd be delighted to attend. I'll send a wagon for you around noon." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Dorothy spent her days cleaning the schoolhouse, organizing books, and preparing lessons. In the evenings, she worked on making the small apartment habitable, scrubbing floors and washing windows until her hands were raw. The townsfolk proved surprisingly helpful. Mrs. Holloway donated curtains for the windows. The blacksmith repaired the broken stove. The general store owner's wife brought a patchwork quilt for Dorothy's narrow bed, and then there was Quentin Quinn. He appeared regularly, sometimes with lumber to fix the leaking roof, other times with men from his ranch to repair the schoolhouse steps or clear the overgrown yard. He never stayed long, but his presence, his quiet support meant more to Dorothy than she cared to admit. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Dorothy dressed in her blue dress, which she'd carefully mended and pressed. She pinned her mother's cameo at her throat and tried to tame her unruly brown hair into a neat bun. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she sighed at her reflection. The Wilson family's words echoed in her mind, too plain, too serious, not what they'd expected. The promised wagon arrived promptly at noon, but instead of a ranch hand, Quentin himself sat in the driver's seat. He wore a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing, his beard trimmed neatly. "Miss Evans," he said, jumping down to help her into the wagon. "You look lovely today." Dorothy felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, knowing it was merely politeness. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I'm looking forward to meeting everyone." The Double Q Ranch sprawled across rolling grasslands outside town, with the majestic Rocky Mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. A large, two-story house stood proudly near a cluster of outbuildings and corrals filled with fine-looking horses. Near the largest barn, crowds of people had already gathered, men preparing to raise the framework of a new structure while women set up tables laden with food. "My old barn burned down in a lightning storm last month," Quentin explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "The whole town's turned out to help build the new one. It's remarkable," Dorothy said, genuinely impressed by the community spirit. "Quinn," a woman's voice called out, and Dorothy turned to see a tall, confident woman striding toward them. She wore practical riding clothes, her dark hair the same shade as Quentin's pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. "You're late, and the Peterson boys are arguing about the support beams again. Rebecca, meet Miss Dorothy Evans, our new schoolteacher. Miss Evans, my sister, Rebecca Quinn." Rebecca's appraising look reminded Dorothy of her brother's, direct and unflinching. Then she smiled, transforming her handsome features. "So you're the Boston teacher everyone's talking about. Welcome to the Quinn spread." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And don't mind my brother's gruff manner. He means well." "Rebecca," Quentin warned, but there was affection in his tone. "Go deal with the Petersons," his sister shot back. "I'll introduce Miss Evans around." As Quentin strode off, Rebecca linked her arm through Dorothy's. "Let me show you where to put your basket." "Oh, I didn't bring anything," Dorothy said, embarrassed. "I didn't know, don't worry about it. First time's always a free pass," Rebecca assured her. "Come meet the other women. Fair warning, they'll ask 1,000 questions. We don't get many new faces, especially educated Eastern women." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Dorothy meeting dozens of townspeople, including many of her future students. The women were friendly, if curious, and the men respectful. She found herself relaxing, even enjoying the lively atmosphere as the men raised the barn's frame amid shouts and good-natured ribbing. By late afternoon, the frame stood complete, and everyone gathered for a feast spread across long tables. Dorothy found herself seated between Rebecca and an elderly woman named Mrs. Fairchild, with Quentin directly across from her. "Miss Evans has been working wonders at the schoolhouse," Quentin told his sister. "You should see the transformation." "I've just been cleaning and organizing," Dorothy demurred. "Nonsense," Rebecca said. "Quinn says you've turned that abandoned shack into a proper classroom. We need more people like you in Copper Creek, people who see potential instead of problems." As the meal progressed, Dorothy noticed Quentin watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and Dorothy felt that strange flutter in her chest again. After the meal, someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing began on the packed earth of the ranch yard. Dorothy watched from the sidelines, enjoying the lively music and the obvious pleasure the dancers took in the simple entertainment. "You dance, Miss Evans." Quentin appeared beside her, hat in hand. "Not very well, I'm afraid," she admitted. "Neither do I," he said with a smile. "We could be terrible together." Before she could answer, a commotion arose from the far side of the yard. A group of riders had arrived, their horses lathered from hard riding. "Quinn," one of the men called out. "Got trouble? Wilson's cattle broke through the north fence line. They're scattered all through Taylor's wheat fields." The smile disappeared from Quentin's face. "When?" "Hour ago." "Thomas Wilson's over there now, but he's only got 2 hands with him. Taylor's threatening to shoot any cow that doesn't move." Quentin turned to Dorothy, regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I have to go." "Of course," she said, understanding immediately. "Don't apologize." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it briefly. "I'll come by the schoolhouse tomorrow, see if you need any help before the children arrive on Monday." Then he was gone, striding toward the stables with several other men. Rebecca appeared at Dorothy's side, watching them go. "Cattle disputes," she said with a sigh. "The eternal problem out here." She glanced at Dorothy. "Don't look so worried. Quinn can handle himself." "I'm not worried," Dorothy protested quickly, "just disappointed about the dancing." Rebecca's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe her for a second. "My brother doesn't ask many women to dance, Miss Evans. In fact, I can't remember the last time I saw him try." Dorothy didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "Your horse breeding program is quite impressive. Mr. Quinn mentioned it's the finest in 3 territories." Rebecca's eyes lit up. "Did he now? Well, he's right, though I'm surprised he said so. Quinn's usually stingy with compliments." She launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her breeding techniques, and Dorothy listened attentively, genuinely interested but also relieved to move away from the subject of Quentin Quinn and dancing. As promised, Quentin appeared at the schoolhouse the next day, looking tired but satisfied. "Got the cattle sorted," he said in response to Dorothy's inquiry. "No thanks to Thomas Wilson. Man's as useless as his mother is mean." Dorothy had spent the morning arranging the classroom for her first day, writing out lessons on the newly repaired blackboard and placing books on each desk. "What do you think?" she asked, gesturing to the transformed space. Quentin walked slowly around the room, touching a desk here, examining a book there. "I think the children of Copper Creek are luckier than they know." He turned to face her. "You've worked miracles here." "Hardly miracles," she said, feeling herself blush. "Just hard work and organization. Don't diminish your accomplishments, Miss Evans. What you've done here matters." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." "Quentin," he said suddenly. "My friends call me Quentin." "Then you must call me Dorothy." A smile spread across his face. "Dorothy?" He said her name like he was testing it, and she found she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "A little," she admitted. "I want to make a good impression." "You will." He reached into his pocket. "I brought you something, a first day of school gift." He held out a small wooden object. Dorothy took it, turning it over in her hands. It was a beautifully carved apple, the wood polished to a warm glow. "I made it," he said, suddenly looking embarrassed. "Not much of an artist, but it's beautiful," she said, touched beyond measure. "Thank you, Quentin." "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I should let you finish preparing. Good luck tomorrow, though you won't need it." After he left, Dorothy placed the wooden apple on her desk, where it caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the freshly washed windows. Something was happening between them, something she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she was ready for. Not after the Wilsons' rejection, which had only confirmed what she'd always suspected, that she wasn't the kind of woman men fell in love with. Yet the way Quentin looked at her sometimes made her wonder if perhaps she'd been wrong. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. Dorothy dressed carefully in her gray dress, which she'd embellished with a white collar she'd sewn by lamplight. She pinned her hair neatly, placed her mother's cameo at her throat, and surveyed her reflection. Plain but presentable, she decided. A proper schoolteacher. At precisely 8 o'clock, she rang the school bell, its clear tone carrying across the town. Within minutes, children began arriving, some on foot, others on horseback or in wagons driven by parents eager to meet the new teacher. By 8:30, 23 students sat at desks, ranging from 6-year-old Sally Turner with her missing front teeth to 16-year-old James Peterson, who slouched in his seat with the air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Dorothy took a deep breath and stepped to the front of the classroom. "Good morning. I'm Miss Evans, your new teacher. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to learn all of your names and a little about what you've been studying." The morning passed quickly as Dorothy assessed her students' varying levels of education. Some of the younger children could barely write their names, while others showed surprising aptitude for mathematics or history. James Peterson, despite his apparent disinterest, revealed a gift for reciting poetry he'd memorized. By the time the children headed home for lunch, most would not return until the next day. Given the distances, some traveled, Dorothy felt cautiously optimistic. It wouldn't be easy teaching such a diverse group with limited resources, but it was a challenge she welcomed. She was straightening the classroom when a knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Quentin standing there, hat in hand. "How was the first morning?" he asked. "Challenging but rewarding," she replied honestly. "The children are bright, though their education has been inconsistent. That's why we needed someone like you." He glanced past her at the neat classroom. "I see my apple found a home." Indeed, the wooden carving sat prominently on her desk. "It's my good luck charm," she said with a smile. He shifted slightly, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was wondering if you might like to join me for supper tonight at the hotel to celebrate your first day." Dorothy's heart skipped a beat. "Like a social call?" "Yes." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Exactly like that." She should say no. Getting involved with anyone here would be foolish, especially so soon after the Wilsons' rejection. Yet the words that came out were, "I'd like that very much." His smile was worth any risk. "I'll call for you at 6. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur as Dorothy alternated between preparing the next day's lessons and fretting about her evening with Quentin. When 6 o'clock approached, she changed into her blue dress again, wishing desperately for something prettier, something that might make her look less plain. He arrived precisely on time, dressed in what were clearly his best clothes, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his eyes seem even bluer. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Dorothy knew it wasn't true, but the sincerity in his voice made her wonder if perhaps to him it was. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The hotel dining room had been transformed for the evening meal, with white cloths on the tables and candles providing a warm glow. Mrs. Holloway showed them to a corner table, her knowing smile making Dorothy blush. Over a dinner of roast beef and potatoes, they talked easily about the school, the ranch, and their backgrounds. Dorothy learned that Quentin had taken over the ranch when their parents died in a flash flood 10 years earlier, raising Rebecca and building the Double Q into one of the most successful operations in the territory. "Rebecca was only 16, he explained, "stubborn as a mule and twice as smart. She's the one who saw the potential in horse breeding when most ranchers around here focus solely on cattle." "You're proud of her," Dorothy observed. "Very, though don't tell her that. Her head's big enough already." Dorothy laughed, then shared her own story, her childhood in Boston with parents who valued education above all else, her father's death from consumption when she was 18, her mother's passing 2 years later. "That's when I started teaching," she explained. "I needed to support myself." "And how did you end up answering a mail-order bride advertisement?" Quentin asked, his tone gentle. Dorothy looked down at her plate. "It's embarrassing." "I doubt that," she sighed. "My aunt, who I lived with after my mother died, was determined to see me married. She said teaching was fine for a young woman, but eventually I'd need a husband. When I turned 22 with no prospects in sight, she began subscribing to matrimonial newspapers." She shook her head at the memory. Thomas Wilson's advertisement sounded perfect. He wanted an educated wife to help with his business correspondence and to eventually raise a family. He described himself as hardworking and God-fearing. "So you wrote to him?" Quentin prompted when she paused. "Yes, we exchanged several letters. He seemed kind, sensible. He sent money for my passage and I came west." She swallowed hard. "What I didn't realize was that his mother would have the final say. When I arrived in Riverton, Mrs. Wilson took one look at me and declared I wouldn't do. She said Thomas needed someone pretty enough to make other men jealous." Those were her exact words. Quentin's expression darkened. That woman is poisonous. Thomas didn't even argue with her, Dorothy continued, the hurt still fresh. He just looked embarrassed and offered to pay for my stage ticket to the next town. That's how I ended up in Copper Creek. Their loss, Quentin said firmly. Their tremendous loss. The conviction in his voice made her look up. You're being kind. I'm being honest. Agatha Wilson wouldn't recognize value if it danced in front of her with a brass band. And her son's a spineless fool who'll never amount to anything without her permission. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Dorothy, when you stepped off that stagecoach, you were the most interesting person I'd seen in years. There's something in your eyes, intelligence, determination, kindness. That's worth more than some empty-headed pretty face. Dorothy's throat tightened with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like this. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, just don't let the Wilsons make you doubt yourself. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, and afterward, Quentin walked her back to the schoolhouse. At her door, he hesitated. I'd like to call on you again, he said. Properly, Sunday afternoons if you're amenable. Dorothy's heart raced. I'd like that very much. He smiled, then lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Dorothy Evans. Good night, Quentin Quinn. As autumn settled over Copper Creek, Dorothy found herself settling into a routine. Weekdays were devoted to her students, who were responding well to her structured yet compassionate teaching style. Even James Peterson had begun to show genuine interest in his studies after Dorothy discovered his talent for mathematics. Sundays, however, belonged to Quentin. True to his word, he called on her each week, sometimes taking her for drives in his buggy along the scenic mountain roads, other times bringing a picnic to enjoy by the creek that gave the town its name. Occasionally, they joined Rebecca at the ranch for Sunday dinner, where Dorothy found herself increasingly comfortable with the Quinn siblings' easy banter. As the weeks passed, Dorothy's feelings for Quentin deepened beyond anything she'd experienced before. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words mattered, all of it combined to create an attachment she both welcomed and feared. For despite his attentions, despite the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, Dorothy couldn't quite believe that a man like Quentin Quinn could truly be interested in a woman like her. Men wanted beautiful wives, as Mrs. Wilson had so bluntly pointed out. Not plain schoolteachers with more education than charm. Yet Quentin continued to call, continued to bring her small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered from the prairie, a handkerchief he'd asked Rebecca to embroider with her initials. And gradually, Dorothy allowed herself to hope. One crisp October Sunday, Quentin arrived with his buggy as usual, but instead of his customary suggestion of a drive or a picnic, he appeared unusually serious. I'd like to show you something, he said. It's a bit of a drive. Curious, Dorothy agreed, and they set off toward the mountains. After about an hour, Quentin turned the buggy onto a narrow track that wound up through a pine forest. Finally, they emerged into a clearing where a half-built cabin stood, its logs golden in the autumn sunlight. What is this place? Dorothy asked as Quentin helped her down from the buggy. Mine, he said simply. I bought this parcel last year, been building whenever I can spare time from the ranch. He led her toward the cabin, pointing out features as they walked. Main room here with a big fireplace, kitchen through there, 2 bedrooms at the back. It's not fancy, but it'll be solid and warm. It's wonderful, Dorothy said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship evident in the construction. But I don't understand, you have the ranch house. Quentin turned to face her, the mountain breeze ruffling his dark hair. The ranch house belongs to the Quinn family, to me and Rebecca, this place. He gestured around them. This would be just mine, or, he took a deep breath, or ours. Dorothy's heart seemed to stop. Ours, he stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Dorothy Evans, I've known since the day you arrived in Copper Creek that you were special. You're the strongest, kindest, most intelligent woman I've ever met. These past months, getting to know you, watching you transform not just the schoolhouse but the lives of your students. It's only confirmed what I knew from the start. Quentin, she whispered, hardly daring to believe where this was leading. I'm in love with you, he said simply. Completely, utterly in love, and if you'll have me, I want to spend my life with you. Here in this home we could build together. Tears filled Dorothy's eyes. But I'm not. I'm plain, ordinary. You could have any woman. Stop, he said firmly. You are extraordinary, and to me, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. You don't have to say that, she protested weakly. I'm saying it because it's true. He cupped her face gently. When I look at you, I see the way your eyes light up when you're teaching. I see the compassion in your smile when you help a struggling student. I see the courage it took to travel alone across the country, to start over when things went wrong. That's beauty, Dorothy. Real beauty? A tear slipped down her cheek and he brushed it away with his thumb. I love you, he said again. Will you marry me? For a moment, Dorothy couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Then finally she managed to whisper, yes, yes, I will. His smile was radiant as he gathered her into his arms. Then, with infinite gentleness, he lowered his head and kissed her a sweet, tender kiss that promised a lifetime of love and respect. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. I was so afraid you'd say no, Dorothy laughed softly. How could I? You've shown me what love really means, seeing someone for who they truly are, not just what's on the surface. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property, planning where they would plant a garden, where they might add a porch for summer evenings. As the sun began to set, turning the mountain peaks to gold, they reluctantly returned to the buggy for the journey back to town. When shall we marry? Quentin asked as they drove. I'd like to finish the school term, Dorothy replied. The children deserve that consistency. It ends just before Christmas. A Christmas wedding then, he said, smiling. Perfect. News of their engagement spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. Most townsfolk seemed genuinely pleased, particularly the parents of Dorothy's students who had seen the positive impact she'd had on their children's education. Rebecca was ecstatic. Finally, she declared when they told her. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the barn to get you to admit your feelings. Even Mrs. Holloway unbent enough to offer her best wishes, along with the promise of a wedding cake, the likes of which Copper Creek has never seen. Only one cloud darkened their happiness. A week after their engagement became public, Dorothy was working late at the schoolhouse when a knock sounded at the door. Opening it, she was startled to find Thomas Wilson standing there, hat in hand. Miss Evans, he said, his voice as hesitant as she remembered. May I come in? Reluctantly, Dorothy stepped aside to admit him. Mr. Wilson, what brings you to Copper Creek? I heard about your engagement to Quinn, he said, fidgeting with his hat brim. I wanted to apologize for how things ended in Riverton. Dorothy crossed her arms. You mean for allowing your mother to send me away without a word of protest, he winced. Yes, that was cowardly of me. Yes, it was. The thing is, he continued, I've been thinking about it ever since, about how I let a good woman go because my mother said so. He took a step closer. It was a mistake, Miss Evans. I see that now. Dorothy stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. What exactly are you saying, Mr. Wilson? I'm saying I'd like another chance. I've got a good farm, prospects. I'd make you a good husband. Dorothy stared at him in disbelief. Mr. Wilson, I'm engaged to be married. To Quinn, yes, but he looked around the modest schoolhouse. Surely you can see that I could offer you more. My farm is the largest in Riverton, and Mother's coming around to the idea. She says, stop, Dorothy interrupted firmly. I don't care what your mother says, Mr. Wilson. I'm in love with Quentin Quinn, and I'm going to marry him. Even if he didn't have a penny to his name, I'd still choose him over you or any other man. Wilson's expression hardened. Because he's handsome. Because all the women in 3 counties have set their caps for him. Because he sees me, Dorothy replied simply. He values me for who I am, not what I look like or what I can do for him. He would never let anyone, especially not his mother, dictate who he could love. You'll regret this, Wilson muttered. Quinn's reputation with women is none of your business, came a deep voice from the doorway. Both Dorothy and Wilson turned to see Quentin standing there, his expression dangerous. Quinn, Wilson said, taking an involuntary step back. We were just talking, I heard, Quentin replied, moving to Dorothy's side. And now you're leaving. Wilson's face reddened. You can't order me around, Quinn, in this town, in my fiancé's schoolhouse. Yes, I can. Quentin's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. Dorothy's made her choice clear. Respect it and leave. For a moment, it seemed Wilson might argue further. Then, with a muttered curse, he jammed his hat back on his head and stalked past them, slamming the door behind him. Dorothy released a shaky breath. How much did you hear? Enough. Quentin turned to her, his expression softening. Are you all right? Yes, just surprised. I never thought he'd come here. Quentin pulled her gently into his arms. What you said to him about seeing you, valuing you, did you mean it? Dorothy looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his strength. Every word. You're the first person who's ever truly seen me, Quentin. How could I not love you for that? He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Dorothy forgot all about Thomas Wilson and his belated proposal. The weeks leading up to their Christmas wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Dorothy continued teaching while helping Rebecca plan the ceremony, which would take place in the town's small church. Quentin divided his time between ranch work and finishing their cabin, determined to have it ready for them to move in after the wedding. On the Saturday before the wedding, a surprise snowstorm blanketed Copper Creek in white. Dorothy stood at the schoolhouse window, watching the snowflakes swirl against the darkening sky when a knock sounded at the door. Opening it, she found Rebecca, her cloak dusted with snow. You need to come with me, she said without preamble. Now, what's wrong? Dorothy asked, alarmed by her future sister-in-law's urgency. Is it Quentin? Nothing's wrong, Rebecca assured her, a mysterious smile playing about her lips. But you need to come to the ranch, immediately. Puzzled but trusting, Dorothy gathered her cloak and followed Rebecca to the waiting wagon. They drove through the snowstorm to the double queue, where Rebecca led her to the main house. Wait here, she instructed, leaving Dorothy in the entry hall while she disappeared down a corridor. A moment later, Quentin appeared, his expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. There you are, he said, taking her hands. I have something to show you. He led her through the house to a room at the back that Dorothy had never entered before. Opening the door, he ushered her in, then stepped back to gauge her reaction. Dorothy gasped. The room had been transformed into a bridal bower. A beautiful dress of ivory satin hung from a stand in one corner, its simple lines enhanced by delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. On a nearby table lay a veil crowned with a circlet of dried flowers, and beside it, a pair of white leather boots. Quentin, she breathed. What is this? Your wedding clothes, he said softly. Rebecca and the ladies from town have been working on them in secret. The dress was my mother's. Rebecca altered it for you. The boots are new, from the finest shoemaker in Denver. Dorothy moved toward the dress, running her fingers over the luxurious fabric. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. There's more, he said, guiding her to a small chest on the dresser. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. This was my grandmother's. I want you to wear it when you become my wife. Tears filled Dorothy's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll wear them. Say you'll marry me in 1 week's time. She turned to him, love overflowing in her heart. Of course I will. He gathered her close, his strong arms enveloping her in warmth and security. 1 week, he murmured against her hair, and then you'll be my wife. And you'll be my husband, she replied, savoring the word. My family. The week passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. On Christmas Eve, Dorothy spent her final night in the schoolhouse apartment, surrounded by gifts from her students and the clothing she would take to her new home. As tradition dictated, she wouldn't see Quentin again until they met at the altar. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the fresh snow sparkling in the sunlight. Rebecca arrived early to help Dorothy dress, bringing with her Mrs. Holloway and several other women from town who had become Dorothy's friends over the past months. As they helped her into the ivory gown, arranged her hair in an elegant upswept style, and draped the veil over her head, Dorothy felt a sense of unreality. Just months ago, she had arrived in Copper Creek as a rejected mail-order bride with nothing but determination and the clothes on her back. Now she was preparing to marry a man who loved her completely, surrounded by a community that had embraced her as one of their own. "There," Rebecca said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Look at yourself." Dorothy turned to the mirror and caught her breath. The woman reflected there seemed transformed not by the beautiful dress or the carefully arranged hair, but by the happiness that radiated from within her. For perhaps the first time in her life, Dorothy Evans felt truly beautiful. "It's time," Mrs. Holloway announced, consulting her watch. "The church will be full by now." Dorothy followed the women outside, where a sleigh waited to carry her the short distance to the church. Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting lazily from a pearl-gray sky. The small church was indeed full to bursting, with townsfolk, ranchers, and all of Dorothy's students crowded into the pews. As the first notes of the wedding march sounded from the organ, Dorothy took a deep breath and began her walk down the aisle. Quentin waited at the altar, tall and handsome in a new black suit. When he turned and saw her, his face transformed with such love and wonder that Dorothy's last doubts melted away. This man truly saw her as beautiful, not despite her plainness, but because of the person she was beneath the surface. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to cherish and support each other through all of life's challenges. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception, held in the town hall, lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, speeches and toasts, and finally, as the night grew late, a sleigh ride to their new home in the mountains. The cabin, completed just days before, welcomed them with the warm glow of a fire already burning in the hearth. Rebecca's doing, no doubt. Quentin carried Dorothy across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," he said softly. Dorothy looked around at the simple but beautiful space, the sturdy furniture Quentin had crafted himself, the colorful quilts Rebecca had contributed, the books Dorothy had brought from her teaching collection. It was perfect. "It's wonderful," she said, turning to face her husband. "Everything I could have wanted." Quentin drew her into his arms. "You are everything I wanted," he murmured against her lips. "Everything I will ever want." Spring came early to the mountains that year. By March, wildflowers carpeted the meadow around the Quinn cabin, and Dorothy had settled into a routine of teaching during the week and returning to their mountain home each weekend. One Sunday afternoon, as they sat on the newly built porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Dorothy turned to her husband with a smile. "I have some news," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "By Christmas, there will be 3 of us in this cabin." The joy that blazed across Quentin's face was everything Dorothy could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby, our family," Dorothy corrected gently. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness, Quentin's hand protectively covering the place where their child grew, he whispered, "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting if the Wilsons hadn't rejected you?" "I thank God every day for Agatha Wilson's poor judgment," Dorothy replied with a soft laugh. "It led me to you, to us," Quentin agreed. "To this life we're building." Dorothy snuggled closer to her husband's warmth, contentment washing over her. From rejected mail-order bride to beloved wife, teacher, and soon-to-be mother, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. "You know," Quentin murmured sleepily, "I meant what I said that first day in the council meeting." "What was that?" "That you were the most beautiful woman in Copper Creek, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." Dorothy smiled in the darkness. Once, she would have dismissed such words as mere flattery. Now she understood that beauty truly did lie in the eye of the beholder, and in Quentin's eyes, she would always be beautiful. "I love you, Quentin Quinn," she whispered, "and I love you, Dorothy Quinn, always." As summer bloomed across the mountains, Dorothy's condition became impossible to hide. Her students were delighted by the news, especially the younger girls who peppered her with questions about the baby. The school board graciously arranged for a substitute teacher to take over in the fall, with the understanding that Dorothy would return after the baby was born if she wished. In July, Quentin added a nursery to their cabin, converting part of the second bedroom into a cozy space for their child. Dorothy sewed tiny garments in the evenings while Quentin crafted a cradle from pine wood, his large hands surprisingly delicate as they shaped the wooden slats. September brought the county fair to Copper Creek, and despite her advancing pregnancy, Dorothy insisted on attending. "Your apple preserves are sure to win first prize," she told Rebecca, who had become not just a sister-in-law but a dear friend. As they wandered through the fairgrounds, Dorothy on Quentin's arm, they encountered a familiar face, Thomas Wilson, accompanied by a young woman with elaborately curled blonde hair and a fashionable dress. "Quinn," Wilson nodded stiffly. "Mrs. Quinn." "Wilson," Quentin replied neutrally. "Enjoying the fair?" "Yes, allow me to introduce Miss Harriet Cunningham, recently arrived from St. Louis, my fiancée." The blonde woman simpered prettily. "Pleased to meet you." Dorothy smiled genuinely. "Congratulations to you both. When is the happy day?" "Next month," Wilson replied, his eyes flickering to Dorothy's rounded belly. "Mother is pleased with the match. I'm sure she is," Dorothy said, keeping her tone pleasant. "I wish you every happiness." As the couple moved away, Quentin squeezed her hand. "You're a better person than I am." "I wanted to ask if his mother picked this one out too." Dorothy laughed softly. "No need. I'm genuinely glad for him. Everyone deserves to find happiness with someone who values them." She looked up at her husband, love warming her eyes. "I certainly did." He bent to kiss her, right there in the middle of the fairgrounds, heedless of the glances and smiles from passing townsfolk. "And I find more reasons to value you every day, Mrs. Quinn." Their daughter, Elizabeth Rebecca Quinn, was born on a snowy November night with Rebecca and the town's midwife in attendance. After hours of labor, Dorothy held her tiny daughter in her arms, exhausted but exultant. "She's perfect," Quentin whispered, perched on the edge of the bed, one finger caught in his daughter's surprisingly strong grip. "She has your eyes. And your stubborn chin," Dorothy replied with a tired smile. "Poor child." Rebecca, wiping away uncharacteristic tears, declared her niece the most beautiful baby in 3 territories, a proclamation that became a running joke in the Quinn family. By the following spring, Dorothy had returned to teaching 2 days a week, bringing Elizabeth with her. The students adored their teacher's baby, and the older girls took turns holding her while Dorothy conducted lessons. One afternoon in May, Dorothy sat on a blanket beneath the old oak tree behind the schoolhouse, watching Elizabeth attempt to crawl while her students enjoyed their lunch break. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see Quentin, unexpected but always welcome. "What brings you to town in the middle of the day?" she asked as he settled beside her on the blanket. "Had business at the bank," he replied, scooping up his daughter, who squealed with delight at the sight of her father. "And I couldn't pass up the chance to see my 2 favorite women." Dorothy leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "We're having chicken and dumplings for supper," she said. "Rebecca's joining us." "Perfect." He kissed the top of her head. "Oh, I almost forgot. A letter came for you." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "From Boston." Dorothy took it curiously. "My aunt, probably." "I wrote to tell her about Elizabeth." She opened the letter and scanned its contents, her expression growing thoughtful. "What is it?" Quentin asked. "My aunt is selling her house in Boston. She's been invited to live with her friend in Philadelphia." She looked up at her husband. "She wants to know if we'd like any of the furniture or books before she sells everything." "Do you want anything, I mean?" Dorothy considered the question, thinking of the life she'd left behind in Boston, the narrow streets, the rigid social expectations, the sense that she would never quite measure up. "No," she said finally, "there's nothing there I need. Everything I want is right here." Quentin's smile was as warm as the spring sunshine. "I feel exactly the same way." That evening, after Elizabeth was tucked into her cradle and Rebecca had ridden back to the ranch, Dorothy and Quentin sat on their porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. "I've been thinking," Quentin said, his arm around her shoulders, "about expanding the house." "Oh," Dorothy looked up at him. "Are you planning to add that library you've been talking about?" "Eventually." But I was thinking more about another bedroom. He met her gaze, his eyes twinkling. Elizabeth might like a brother or sister someday. Dorothy laughed softly. Someday might be sooner than you think. It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Quentin's face lit with joy. Are you certain? The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We should expect a new addition around Christmas. He gathered her close, his kiss conveying all the love and excitement words couldn't express. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I never imagined I could be this happy. Nor I, Dorothy admitted. When I arrived in Copper Creek, rejected and alone, I thought my chance at happiness had passed me by. And now, she smiled, touching his beloved face. Now I know it was just beginning, that everything, even the rejection, led me exactly where I was meant to be. Their second child, a son they named James Quentin Quinn, arrived 2 days after Christmas. Like his sister, he was declared perfect by his besotted parents and aunt. As the years passed, the Quinn family thrived. Dorothy eventually became the principal of the growing Copper Creek School, while Quentyn expanded the Double Q into one of the most successful ranches in Colorado Territory. Their cabin grew too, with the addition of the promised library, a larger kitchen, and eventually a third bedroom for their youngest daughter, Catherine, born 5 years after James. Thomas Wilson and his pretty wife moved to Denver after his mother's death, where he found moderate success as a merchant. Dorothy occasionally heard news of them through mutual acquaintances, but felt no regret for the path not taken. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quentyn surprised Dorothy with a party at the ranch, inviting the entire town to celebrate. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and their 3 beautiful children, Quentyn held her close. 10 years, he murmured, the best 10 years of my life. Dorothy looked up at her husband, at the silver now threading through his dark hair, at the laugh lines fanning from his still brilliant blue eyes. He was more handsome to her now than the day they met, his face a beloved map of their shared life. Do you remember what you said to me that day at the cabin when you proposed? She asked. I said many things, he replied with a smile, but I suspect you're thinking of one in particular. You said I was the most beautiful woman you'd ever seen. And you still are, he said without hesitation, more beautiful with each passing year. Dorothy touched his face gently. I didn't believe you then. I thought you were just being kind. I know, but it was true then, and it's true now. He kissed her softly. Beauty isn't just what you see in a mirror, Dorothy. It's who you are, your strength, your kindness, your intelligence. Everything that makes you the woman I fall in love with all over again each day. As they swayed together under the Colorado stars, Dorothy Quinn felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here from rejected mail order bride to beloved wife, mother, and teacher. In Quentin's eyes, she had always been beautiful. And in his love, she had found the courage to believe it herself. I love you, Quentin Quinn, she whispered against his chest. And I love you, Dorothy Quinn, he replied, the words as true as they had been 10 years before. Always.